Greetings, Dr. Ron Leward here. Welcome to my YouTube page. So today we're going to discuss osteoporosis prevention, and the focus of this presentation is to provide you with nutritional information that is useful and practical that will help improve your bone health in four specific ways. The first is to increase your bone density. The second is to reduce your risk of developing osteoporosis. The third is reduction of fracture risk. And a little bonus, if you follow all the nutritional recommendations that I provide for you here, you'll also have a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. So if we discuss nutrition as it pertains to our bone health and cardiovascular health, we have to talk about calcium and how important calcium is. Calcium happens to be the most ubiquitous mineral in the human body. It exists in our bones and teeth in the form of calcium hydroxyapatite. Calcium circulates through our tissues and through the bloodstream, and it plays roles in bone formation, cell conduction, muscle function, hormone regulation, and cardiac function. Calcium is so important that if we don't get enough of it in through diet and through supplementation, our body will literally pull calcium from the bone and demineralize our bones in order to maintain serum calcium levels. So if we don't eat enough of the good stuff and we don't bring enough calcium in, we will literally start to develop osteoporosis. So in the United States, there are nearly 9 million osteoporotic fractures each year. And in women over age 45, fractures result in more hospitalizations than for diabetes, heart attack, heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and breast cancer combined. Osteoporotic fractures account for just about 44%, a little bit more than that, of nursing home admissions. And there is strong association between bone demineralization or reduced bone density and cardiovascular disease. If we take a look at the center photo here, this is a lateral x-ray of a lumbar spine. So this person is facing in this direction here, facing to your right. This is the tailbone down here. So this would be the buttocks, the front of the torso and stomach, and so this is our lower back. This is our lumbar spine. As you can see here, the L5 vertebra is a nice block shape. It's intact. There's a normal disc space here. If we go one level above, however, we see an L4 compression fracture. Notice that this L4 vertebra is a wedge-shaped compared to the L3 vertebra above and the L5 vertebra below. If this type of fracture occurs in the upper back region, what we'll see is a wedge deformity in the upper thoracic spine, and the resultant postural deformity is known as kyphosis. Kyphosis can become very painful when it progresses. It can restrict your breathing, and oftentimes is associated with cardiorespiratory disease, and therefore will lead to a shortened lifespan. So in further discussing calcium and the need for calcium, we first have to address some of the problems with the traditional American diet, which is essentially devoid of calcium. The traditional American diet does not provide adequate calcium to prevent osteoporosis. And in fact, if you eat this stuff here, which is standard in the American diet, drive-through food, processed food, fast food, foods that are pre-prepared, canned goods, these are all on the not good list, not healthy list in terms of bone health. So what we need to do is avoid these foods. We need to additionally reduce our intake of processed carbohydrates and flour-based products, our breads, our pastas, our sweet cakes, bran muffins, bagels, junk food. We need to reduce our intake or completely eliminate the intake of soda. And we'll go into some of the reasons why these foods are terrible in terms of inflammation and reducing your bone density. Incidentally, there are about 10 teaspoons of sugar in a 12-ounce can of soda. So if you can't figure out that that's really no good for you, then you might as well just not listen to the rest of this presentation. Soda is one of the worst things that you can put into your body, and we're going to get into exactly why. All right, so what do we need to do? We need to intake, through supplementation, 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. Try to get a mononutrient calcium. In other words, you don't want it combined with magnesium or vitamin D3. You want mononutrient calcium at 1,000 milligrams. We want to supplement additionally with vitamin D3. So if you go to your doctor, have them check your vitamin D levels. Your vitamin D levels are checked with a 25-hydroxy vitamin D assay. So just ask your doctor for a vitamin D checkup. And what we can do, if you don't supplement vitamin D, immediately start taking 1 to 5,000 international units per day. Hopefully you know your vitamin D levels, and they're somewhere close to around 50 nanograms per deciliter. This is where we want our vitamin D levels. We don't want them around 30. So the optimal nutritional recommendation is to have your blood tested and then supplement vitamin D somewhere in between the 1 to 5,000 international units per day based on the current level. And that's the way we get our D levels correct. You want to check with your doctor for any contraindications, such as patients on Coumadin, patients who have hypercalcemia or hyperparathyroidism. We want to check with your doctor to make sure that it's okay to take vitamin D. So in order to promote better bone health, we want to increase our levels of intake of green leafy vegetables, fermented sources of dairy such as yogurt and kefir. Fermented sources of calcium such as yogurt, kefir, cheese, almonds, chia seeds, liver, egg yolks, and soups and stews made with bones. The bones are a good source of calcium hydroxyapatite. If we work our way over to this last point here, we want to eat grass-fed meats instead of your standard meats that are offered at Publix, for example, down here in Florida. All you do is you go to the meat section, and it's usually on the top shelf. You'll find grass-fed beef, you'll find buffalo, bison, and likely we'll find grass-fed steaks. They're about a third more expensive than your standard corn and wheat and grain-fed beef. But as you'll see with the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, which will introduce that concept and how important that is, the grass-fed meats are what you want to put in. There's no inflammation with the grass-fed meat because they don't eat corn. The cows don't eat corn. They don't eat wheat. The grass-fed meat is allowed to roam the hillside and eat healthy grass. So you want to avoid obese meat. Obese meat is your standard steak that you purchase in any restaurant or any butcher shop. You want to ask for grass-fed meat, otherwise you're buying obese meat. And certainly this stuff here, hot dogs and deli foods, deli meats, sausages, anything that's prepackaged, kielbasa, these are all, in some studies, found to be carcinogenic. So we don't want to eat this type of stuff because it's processed and has a lot of chemicals in it, and the outcomes are not good at all. So where do we get our calcium from? Well, in the previous slide, we just mentioned fermented sources of calcium, and that has, there's a picture right here, some cheese. So this is what we want to eat as opposed to drinking cow's milk. So dairy in and of itself is a good source of calcium. However, cow's milk is not a safe source of calcium. You'll see me refer to safe sources of calcium through this lecture. There's consistent evidence in the literature for dairy-induced human diseases. So if we get too much dairy, there are associations in the literature with prostate cancer and type 1 diabetes for those who intake tons of dairy in their diet. Additionally, a recent study showed that if you drink 3 or more glasses of milk per day, you run the chance of having an increased fracture risk and higher mortality rate compared to people who do not drink more than 3 glasses of milk per day. It's somewhat counterintuitive. You think you'd get more calcium and everything is good about drinking the milk. However, milk is an inflammatory substance, and we're going to go over why exactly that recommendation holds. So because of the adverse effects of milk, in particular, milk is broken down to D-glucose and D-galactose. The D-galactose is associated with disease. It's associated with neurodegeneration, systemic inflammation, accelerated aging, and overall a shortened lifespan. So milk is not a safe source of calcium if you're drinking more than 1 glass per day. The author of this particular article, Dr. Cordain, and his associates recommend eating grass-fed meats and lean sources of protein such as chicken and green leafy vegetables in combination with 1,000 milligrams of calcium supplemented per day. And we stay away from drinking a lot of milk, and this is our best approach to having healthy bones. Yogurt and cheese are healthier and safer than cow juice because of the D-galactose, which is metabolized by our gut bacteria. So the D-galactose in cheese is metabolized and it is not harmful, where if we ingest the D-galactose in the form of cow's milk, it is harmful. So here's a healthy, safe list of calcium-rich foods. And if you eat yogurt and sardines and salmon, spinach, kale, chia seeds, oranges, almonds, broccoli, these should all be part of your natural health-promoting diet, your anti-inflammatory diet. We see Brussels sprouts and mixed nuts, fish, grass-fed meats, wild game, dark chocolate, brown rice, soups and stews cooked with bones. You want to write this down. Red wine, stout beer, green tea, dark chocolate. Red wine, stout beer, green tea, dark chocolate. These are very healthy substances, okay? You want to make sure that if you drink your coffee, you're not loading it up with a bunch of dairy. You want to drink your coffee essentially black. And if you go back to the first slide, you'll notice that I placed a cup of black coffee on the cover, and that was very specifically because the black coffee is extremely healthy. It contains a lot of antioxidants, and same with the red wine and stout beer, a lot of polyphenols and a lot of substances that are antioxidant and anti-inflammatory in nature. Vegans, we need to be aware that we don't run into calcium deficiencies. So vegans have an increased risk for bone fracture. And that is because, in general, most vegans eat a lot of whole wheat and oats and rice and corn, black beans, soybeans, pinto beans, peanuts, and lentils. And these are all pro-inflammatory and create issues with inflammation. So one of the problems with these substances is they reduce calcium absorption. So vegans need to be aware of the somewhat detrimental effects of not eating meat. We can run into vitamin deficiencies. Also, B vitamin deficiencies are common among vegans. So really, how do we know what to eat to improve our bone health and not risk inflammation and other issues that come with the pro-inflammatory types of diets that we see here in America? Well, most of the foods which will improve your bone health have three things in common. And I've broken this down based on what I think is consistent in its ability to be reproduced. So if we recommend omega-3 to omega-6 ratios as a focus, instead of calories, instead of whether or not we're seeing X grams of protein, or we're looking at gluten content and whether it's keto or paleo, the bottom line with healthy foods are that they have proper omega-6 fatty acid to omega-3 fatty acid ratios. And the foods that promote increased bone health and longevity are those which are considered to have omega-6 to omega-3 ratios of 1:1 up to 4:1. And so you can go to Wikipedia, here's the link right here, and look up fatty acid ratios in foods. Educate yourself and just decide that you're going to choose the foods based on the 6:3 ratio. And if you choose foods based on only that, you will definitely choose the more healthy foods. So we'll get into it. We'll get into more specifics on this 6:3 ratio. If we're looking at foods also by another factor, which I think is extremely important, it's the glycemic index. So the link to the Harvard Glycemic Index is right here. So look up the Harvard Glycemic Index, and generally you will find that foods that are healthier for you, which promote bone health and reduce tissue inflammation, are foods which have a glycemic index of 50 or lower. So what these foods do is what they do is they maintain or help you maintain normal glucose levels. They don't spike your blood sugar. So in comparison, if you eat an apple versus a bag of Skittles, with the Skittles, you are just going to drive your blood sugar through the roof. This will result in an insulin dump from your pancreas, and you will maintain high sugar levels for a period of time, which are abnormal. If you eat an apple, for example, your sugar levels will go up and come down to a normal level in a very short period of time, and there's not such an accentuated response from the pancreas. So ingestion of foods that are high glycemic index over the course of a long period of time will lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So if we look at the omega-6 to 3 ratios, and those are correct, those foods typically will also have a low glycemic index and be considered anti-inflammatory. So what we need to look at with our foods is the 6:3 ratio and the glycemic index. And so let's go ahead and continue with that concept on the next. So once again, we go to Wikipedia, check out fatty acid ratios in foods, and you'll see that I wrote down I made notations for some of the things that you should have in your kitchen. You should have grass-fed butter and olive oil, as opposed to corn oil and palm oil. The ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 in corn oil is 49:1. This is much more favorable. So you have 6:1 omega-6 to omega-3s, or 12:1 omega-6 to omega-3s in olive oil. These numbers are disastrous. These oils are pro-inflammatory, and they are not suited for human consumption, in my opinion. We look at chickpeas, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta. These numbers are off the charts as well. So these, like the whole wheat idea of whole wheat and whole grain, it's supposed to be, according to the food industry, healthy for you, but it's really not. It's pro-inflammatory. And then if you look up the glycemic index of wheat bread, it is approximately, it's in the 70s, 72 to 77. And if you remember what we just said about the glycemic index, you want foods to be 50 or less. So wheat bread is a total disaster when it comes to inflammation and glycemic index. Isn't that funny that the food industry tells you that you should be eating this stuff every day? If we look at wild game, green veggies, fruit, bacon, for example, is much more healthy for you because it has a low omega-6 fatty acid content than is a bowl of cereal, for example. So this is where you want to be with your foods. Let's talk about other issues that are strong drivers of osteoporosis, and that's going to the drive-through. You need to stay out of the drive-through. You need to never drink soda or sugary drinks. We need to eliminate this stuff. We need to eliminate products with high fructose corn syrup, again, soda, salad dressings. This stuff is absolutely unfit for human consumption. Ingestion of soda and high fructose corn syrup over the past, let's say, 40 years in this country has driven us to the chronic degenerative diseases and the status in which we currently hold here in America. I think we run the crown on planet Earth for the most obese country. So anyway, we want to take half home for later. This concept is something that I do on a regular basis. If I go out for a steak, I eat half the steak. Baked potato, it's broccoli or something, you know, whatever it is, I take half of it home. The portions are way too large. And I suggest that you eat until you're just comfortable. Don't eat so that you will sit back and rub your belly for an hour and fall asleep. That's unhealthy for you. Drink lots of water. We need to flush our system. We also need to exercise, whether it's walking or the weights. We need to do something to stress our muscles, which will in turn provide us with stronger bones. So here's the concept that I'd like you to understand. In order to improve your bone density, reduce your fracture risk and your risk of osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease, foods that you consume should be considered anti-inflammatory, that's mostly plant materials or plants, and have the correct ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, as well as have a glycemic index that is 50 or lower, okay? The food industry does not address these nutritional concepts. The glycemic index is never addressed on a package. You'll never see the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios on a package or a label. If they wanted you to know what that stuff was all about, basically you would never buy their products. So they put stuff like all natural and only 3 carbs and part of a healthy diet on the box because they're allowed to lie and give you half-truths so that you purchase their pro-inflammatory, weight-gaining, bone-destroying products. So again, omega-6 to omega-3 ratios proper, 50 or less on the glycemic index, that's a winner-winner. You can't go wrong with those two concepts. Well, now that we discussed calcium and sources of calcium, safe sources of calcium, we need to also discuss magnesium. So good dietary sources of magnesium are pumpkin seeds, fish, grass-fed meats, brown rice, mixed nuts, dark chocolate, spinach, and yogurt. And we recommend about 400 milligrams of of magnesium per day. We already recommended, 1,000 milligrams of calcium. And then, so what this will do is reduce your risk for type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. It will reduce your risk of myocardial infarction and hypertension, as well as promote healthy neurologic function and modulation of pain. So if we combine calcium and magnesium with safe sources of calcium, mostly cheeses and yogurts, and we eat a net alkaline diet, mostly a plant-based diet, and we look for the omega-6 to 3 ratios and the glycemic index in foods, this all will support better bone health and good cardiovascular function. So part of the American disaster in terms of our dietary intake is sodium. So in the United States, we consume much more sodium than we do potassium. Potassium sources are from fruits and vegetables. So we drink a lot of soda and we eat a lot of preserved food, packaged goods that are high in sodium. So if we have a sodium-potassium ratio, this is going to affect our bone health. Too much sodium leads to bone demineralization. So high dietary sodium is associated with endothelial damage, that's the inside of our arteries, arterial stiffness, decreased nitric oxide production, and increased levels of vascular endothelial growth factor. These lead to cardiovascular diseases and cancer. Evidence suggests a reduction in cardiovascular events with a net alkaline potassium-rich diet. So what that means is we'll have less heart attack and stroke and less heart disease if we eat a plant-based diet as opposed to eating the sugary and carbohydrate-laden diet, which renders our system acidic. If we address soda and the sugary drinks here, well, this speaks for itself. The average can of Coke has about 12 teaspoons of sugar in it. That's absolutely disgusting. And if you want to get really crazy, you go down here to the Big Gulp, the big boy. And this guy has, I think it's, if you count across the bottom, I think there are 8 teaspoons plus 7 plus 6 plus 5, etc. I think that all adds up to around 36 teaspoons of sugar in a Big Gulp. So there is one program that I would recommend that you watch on YouTube. It's called Fat Chance, and the author is Robert Lustig, L-U-S-T-I-G. He's doing a lecture at MIT, and we always recommend this for our patients. Hopefully you'll watch this. And he goes over the content of a soda and what the food industry puts in sodas to addict us, to keep us hooked on this stuff, as well as he goes over some of the metabolism and processing of high fructose corn syrup, which is very interesting too. I can almost guarantee if you watch this program, you'll likely never drink a soda again, because you're going to learn how bad this stuff is for you. Soda contains the HFCS, the high fructose corn syrup. It's an addictive substance, and literally soda promotes bone demineralization. So this is not something that we want to allow our kids to drink maybe more than once or twice a month, a can of soda possibly. If I'm correct, I would say the average kid will drink possibly a 6-pack of soda a week or more. Unfortunately, studies on type 2 diabetes in young persons are extremely unfavorable. We have a lot of young kids with osteoporosis or on their way to osteoporosis and type 2 diabetes and obesity, mainly from the ingestion of soda and sweet drinks. So if we take a look at the typical American breakfast, which I call the Great American Breakfast Disaster, it is loaded with foods that have improper omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratios, as well as foods that are in violation of the glycemic index rule of being 50 or less. So if we look at our typical breakfast, look at some cereal here. We have Special K and Raisin Bran, Cocoa Puffs, Corn Flakes, and instant oatmeal. Well, if we look at the omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratios in these foods, they are way off the 1-to-1 up to 4-to-1 ratio. Likewise, if we take a look at Special K or any of these products on the glycemic index, we're going to find out that they are significantly higher than 50 on the glycemic index and therefore are inappropriate to consume. If we look at toast, whether it's wheat or white toast, so these are your cereals here. This is your typical other form of carbohydrate, such as a gas station brand muffin, a waffle, pancakes, or bagels. These are all in violation of the 6-to-3 ratio, as well as the glycemic index. For example, our pancakes or bagels are in the 60s to 70s and violate the glycemic index 50 or less rule. Beverages, if we drink orange juice or cow juice refer to that. Cow milk is cow juice. We may drink a Coke or a Big Gulp or go get a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts for our caffeine fix. And these are all going to violate the glycemic index rule. Breakfast sandwiches, going over to McDonald's or going to get a drive-through breakfast burrito. This is a disaster. If you look at the quality of the meat in these products, they are all processed meats. They're probably made from animal parts like snouts and skin and ears. These are not consumable in any way, shape, or form, in my professional opinion. So these foods, our great American breakfast disaster, is guilty of violating everything you just learned about foods that promote healthy bones. So again, what we should be eating for breakfast is eggs and grass-fed meat or bacon, or eggs and some fruit, eggs and a nice breakfast salad. Yeah, they have that, breakfast salad. Imagine that. Green leafy stuff, you feel good afterwards. And you won't get the 10 o'clock a.m. crash like you will from eating this stuff. Guaranteed after eating this stuff, you're going to have to down a couple of power drinks to keep yourself awake. So that's not good either. So we violate the omega-6 to 3 ratio with the typical American breakfast. We violate the glycemic index. Most of the foods that you see above all of them are actually processed. None of them are considered anti-inflammatory. Most of these foods have preservative chemicals or loads of sugar, the wrong fats and oils. These foods are considered calorie dense and nutritionally deficient. That's the great American breakfast. So most of the studies recommend food, natural whole foods, as your ideal source of calcium, not cow's milk. So a plant-based low-grain diet alters the acid-base status so as to be slightly alkaline, and this is conducive to better bone health. So we want a lot of plants in our diet. Since plants are not a very good source of calcium, however, they need to be combined with richer sources of calcium, safe sources of calcium, not milk, preferably cheese and animal bones. So fermented sources of calcium are preferred over cow's milk due to better bioavailability. And if we consider ingesting some bones, this is also a good source of calcium hydroxyapatite. In fact, our hunter-gatherer ancestors consumed the majority of calcium in the form of animal bones from small mammals, large mammals, birds, and reptiles. And therefore, we as humans are already adapted to consume calcium in the form of bones, where calcium is absorbed with a matrix of other nutrients, such as magnesium and strontium, zinc, copper, iron, various proteins, and collagen, and osteocalcin. These are all really great promoters of thick, healthy, strong bones. So in conclusion, calcium plays an important role in cardiovascular health and bone health. Safe sources of calcium are best obtained from foods. However, the source of calcium should be considered due to sometimes detrimental effects of other substances present, such as D-galactose in milk, which we reviewed. We should supplement 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day in combination with lean protein, such as fish and grass-fed meat. We should consume regularly green leafy vegetables, bone and bone derivatives, fermented dairy, almonds, chia seeds, and other omega-3 rich foods. This is currently the most effective nutritional strategy available for improving long-term bone and cardiovascular health. Foods that are typically advertised by the food industry as healthy should generally be avoided, or at least researched prior to consumption. So that concludes this presentation. The source document here is Nutritional Strategies for Skeletal and Cardiovascular Health. All of the information, or at least a good portion of it, was taken from this article in the Open Heart Journal. And we have to give Dr. O'Keefe and Bergman and Vastos and Dr. Lauren Cordine credit for this information. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you got some information that would encourage you to eat healthier. Remember, the omega-6 to omega-3 concept and the glycemic index concept are probably two of the most important concepts introduced here. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comment section. Please like and subscribe. And again, it's a pleasure to provide this information. If you have any suggestions, please indicate so in the comment section. Once again, Dr. Ron Lewert, have a nice day.